if I wanted to truly make an impact, I have to find something that I'm really, really passionate about. And I had to come up with a way to survive for 5 to 10 years during what I call my dark ages of really trying to ramen noodle this thing. This is where I asked the right question. Who has the highest ad revenue? Who are we paying ads to today? Google and Facebook. What did Google and Facebook do to become Google and Facebook? Who did they buy ads from? Billboards? We get this sort of feeling that life is like riding an escalator, and you're just kind of moving on up, and then you go right into the workforce, and you could see these organizational charts, and all of a sudden the escalator starts to break. The idea that you can just continue on the escalator over to the other side and run a company is naive. In order to do that, you have to have something that you're truly, truly passionate about. And often it has to be irrational and driven by emotion.
Happy New Year, fellow hustlers. Welcome back to the Generation Hustle podcast, the show that explores the world of business, entrepreneurship, and culture, all centered around the millennial. I'm your co-host, Amin, alongside my good friend, Sheriston. We're going to start 2021 with a bang, as we had the opportunity to sit down with Knowledgehook CEO, Travis Ratnam. His company is making waves in the education industry with their unique instructional software platform that is bridging the gap between engaged learning for students and professional development for teachers. Having recently raised over $20 million to help scale the business, Travis explains how his team views growth, how to sell to government organizations, and where the future of online learning is headed. So with that being said, let's jump right into it.
Take off from there. But yeah, so Travis, thank you so much. We were excited about this opportunity to be able to dive into Knowledgehook and hear more about your career journey. Because as you mentioned, we did some homework on our questions, and as I was looking you up, I was like, man, you have a hand in everything. So maybe you can kind of tell us about your career journey thus far and kind of how you came to today to find Knowledgehook.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, guys. I guess you're right. A lot of what you saw, though, was me working in various jobs. I guess if you look back at, I guess you're probably referring to my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
But I've worked in a number of industries, a number of departments that just range quite an eclectic background in that sense. But I started working when I was as young as 7, from Toronto Star salesman to a cook at KFC when I was in high school. I was doing odd jobs in the middle of between summers. I was a magician. I was an entrepreneur. Started my own business, I guess, sole proprietorship. At 13, printed like business cards at Staples, and mom made a small mini tux, and I just knocked doors at banquet halls and actually, offered my services as a magician and borrowed my dad's briefcases and put all my and so I've been around adults for a long time, and I may have even done a magic show for your first birthdays. A lot of first birthdays.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of me getting exposed to the work, receptionist at a church, all the way to working in PR, but also that was during high school, insurance, and then eventually engineering departments while in co-op. So what you saw, what you're referring to in terms of the background, has a lot to do with just leading up to going to university. And then eventually, when I graduated university, I ended up working at Microsoft in Redmond. And that was really my first full-time, career. And then product manager. And then went on to leave that to do my MBA and then come to, which brings me here to Knowledgehook and starting the company. So that's been quite a journey. And I can tell you this, along that journey, having met so many adults, I think at the age of roughly 25, I experienced what I think many experience roughly around the age of 45, 50, which is your midlife crisis.
Okay.
I had been around adults for so long in the work environment and saw sort of the cyclical nature of work and in some cases passion, in some cases not so much. Mm-hmm. And felt that sort of early indication that if you don't find something that challenges you or that you're passionate about, and you're noticing, your own personal growth, and you might feel like having shackles, going to work, golden shackles maybe
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
cases. And
Yeah, we
so,
feel you.
yeah,
We feel you entirely. So welcome to the podcast. This is why we started this.
fair enough. Yeah. So that happened around 25, and I thought I was, and maybe even before 25, because I thought product manager would be the thing for me. And so when I worked at Microsoft, I thought I was doing the thing, and I learned very quickly Microsoft. To use an analogy, the wall socket. So AC, there was, long before the power grid first came out, there was a battle between Nikola Tesla, Westinghouse, and J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison, competing for the future of electricity and who would administer that. And there was also a battle in the choice of tech between AC, DC. Obviously, AC now, obviously we know is the right choice, but that battle was happening, and there was a ton of innovation happening during that time. And the brightest minds, both in finance, business, engineering, were coming together to really to battle it out. And I bring in finance because there was a lot of M&A happening during that time as well. And so it really was bringing the brightest of all these domains to fight it out, and incredible energy and excitement was there. And I think, when I was a product manager at Microsoft, the Microsoft Office, I realized all of that initial battle would have occurred probably in the 90s,
Right.
maybe early 2000s, where the concept of desktop computing and the concept of office productivity was in its early days, and industries were slowly adopting these tools and productivity tools. And so maybe around that time, a lot of really, really big ideas were being tested and brought to market. When I got there, they had the brightest people I've ever met in my life, but we had very little to do relative to probably what was happening in the 90s and the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so you had this scarcity of room for ideas and innovation, because you had this infrastructure that had been built and had a customer base whose expectations you had to meet, and very little room to innovate or disrupt it without enough of red tape, and very much as it should be.
Right.
And it reminded me of the wall sockets. Like it hadn't changed in the last 50 years. And so maybe I was just at the early stage of among the first few to realize that the excitement was, of doing those things has been, there's diminishing return at this point.
Yeah.
So I was starting to hit my midlife crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I left. And for me, my personal story, how I arrived to deciding to build a company, and maybe this might be somewhat helpful for your listeners, is I was influenced by a book called The Dip. You might have been okay. I'm glad you guys are nodding. This is great. The Dip is I recommend it, and if you don't have time to read it, just Google The Dip and look at the images that Google pop up, and I'll show you a picture of a dip with a nice little description. And when we go into school, and as we sort of go through school, we get this sort of feeling that life is like riding an escalator, and and you're just kind of moving on up, and then you go right into the workforce, and you could see these organizational charts, and all of a sudden the escalator starts to break, and you start realizing each step onward takes way more time than it used to be coming through school and university. And then all of a sudden you realize that, wait a minute, I may not actually, that's it. Like there's all these people on the other side of a hill, but there's no clear path to go from here to there. And it seems like they're really happy, or they're, in their element, and they're, doing some really responsible, heavy lifting. And there's room for growth for you to demonstrate. The opportunities start to get a little more scarce. And so in the book, it references this as a naivety curve, or the idea that you can just continue on the escalator, over to the other side and run a company
Mm-hmm.
is naive. And the truth is, the folks on the other side, there was a risk reward path that they had taken, and with no guarantee of upward mobility in any, whether it be by any indicator of success. In fact, they spent what appears to be a 5 to 10 year period in the moving in the opposite direction after all that hard work and success, walking away from it, still working even harder, but from the eyes of society, it looks like they're failing or not doing anything at all. And what they were doing is investing in where they thought the future of something would exist, and started developing the skills to be able to do something meaningful, in time to ride that trend and that wave. That's as best as I can describe this
Yeah.
in general terms. For me, I recognize that, in order to do that, you have to have something that you're truly, truly passionate about. And often it has to be irrational and driven by emotion. And that sounds crazy.
Yeah.
To be driven by emotion. When is it ever rational to be driven by just emotion? I would argue that this is perhaps one of the few, there are very few things I would recommend to make decisions based on emotion. This is one of those. And it's because if you think rationally, and if the goal is to make money, purely money, and then there are much more rational ways to do that without going to the dip. The perfect risk reward ratio of just staying at a job or finding that sort of safe path can get you that, and you can have a more well balanced life.
Right.
And I speak now to the path of entrepreneurship, because I don't think it's necessarily one that I recommend for everyone. I don't even think, I wouldn't even recommend to my family members having gone through what I went through. I wouldn't wish it upon it for my own son. It is a group, like a really painful, and I didn't know how hard it was going to be. So it is. So really, like, there are much more rational ways to enjoy life and find your passion. But for me, I realized that if I wanted to truly make an impact, I have to find something that I'm really, really passionate about, and that I was willing to give 5 to 10 years of my life sacrificing. And I had to come up with a way to survive for 5 to 10 years during what I call my dark age, the dark ages, of really trying to ramen noodle this thing, swim underwater, whatever analogy you want to use, until I can come out the other end of that dip for me. So for my personal story is I struggled in math.
Yeah.
And,
Wait, and you're selling a math-based software now too.
Yeah, exactly. And Knowledgehook being a math software, as you can tell now in hindsight, why I was so passionate about this. My father was a math tutor, and he was the one that I guess saved me from really spiraling downward in school, because I was the poorest performing kid in my school in elementary in Scarborough, growing up in Scarborough. And my father really saved me, and my mom as well. She quit her job to stay home, help me with the languages. My dad helped me with math, and eventually I managed to somehow keep my head above water. Eventually, do really well to the point where, as you know, I ended up doing engineering, and then to Waterloo, and then went to work at Microsoft. But I had an imposter syndrome as well along the way, which I could share more about. But anyway, long story short, that was the driving force for me to go through the dip and run that sort of long marathon run.
For sure. Yeah, I like the metaphor of the escalator, because I think that sums up how we all feel, kind of sitting in a position where we don't know what we're doing and kind of just expecting things to happen along the way. So I think discomfort and any kind of pain, whatever kind of, however it manifests, is what kind of forces you to acknowledge those things and drive you towards certain things. So you mentioned you're bad at math. Is that when is that what kind of the idea that sparked your kind of venture into a math based kind of business?
You would think that, but Knowledgehook started about 4 or 5 years ago. I did, but my struggle in math, I didn't realize that was what I was going to spend my time in. But because of my struggle in education in general, ed tech was something I made the decision 10 years ago to actually explore the space. I'm just pulling up something here on the screen for the viewers on the podcast. Obviously, they can't see this, but I actually have a business plan
Oh,
that I
no
wrote in
way. Yeah.
2011 calling Disrupting the
love
Ed
it.
Tech Industry.
I
Right. And
love
so,
it. You
so
came
they,
prepared. I love it.
well, no, it's been sitting here for a little while. My dad came by and brought it and showed it to me, and so I haven't had a chance to put it away. But it is essentially truly it's been a 10-year, roughly a 10-year journey in ed tech, just learning the space. So I pivoted a few times from university, MCAT, until I found that sort of spot. So I didn't know it was going to be math, but when I got here, it did. Um, you know, as you know, because of my story, I realized this is it. This is the. I looked at the problem space. I looked at what my skill sets were, and I looked at my own personal story of and relationship with math with my dad, and I knew that like this was my calling, and that's how I got there. You mentioned something there about uh, the idea of discomfort, and I think that's a really good point. And it doesn't necessarily uh, require you to start a company to achieve the dip or discomfort and grow.
Right.
My wife, for example, had a completely different career track, through organizations. But as you pointed out, Sheriston, the key thing here is to push a little past your comfort zone and be okay with not. And the idea is to not expect results in 2 years or 3 years. If you can afford to push past your comfort zone and sustain that discomfort, in a healthy and sustainable way for 5 years or 5 to 10 years, and plan out that journey versus the 100-meter sprints, you're going to find yourself in a very good place 5 to 10 years out. At the end
Right.
of the day, if you succeed 2 years out, but then fail again, or fall back down, that's not exactly the goal, is it? So
Yeah.
it's how do you create sustainable success in your life in terms of mastery and passion and making an impact in the world. If you plan 5 to 10 in anything, be it entrepreneurship or in your career, in terms of learning and discomfort and taking on challenges and not expecting reward. In fact, some cases going in the opposite direction of reward.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of folks, including, I'll give you an example, the former president, CEO of Cisco Canada, who before that was after that was the president of Rogers. So he was a mentor for me all of last year. Once a week, we'd be grabbing Starbucks, and he would walk me through his journey, what he did at Cisco, reporting to John Chambers, who was the founder of Cisco in the US, and their whole story. And when you look at him and many other examples like him, you could never plot out a perfect escalator from there to those roles. It was the exact opposite.
Yeah.
How he tried a whole bunch of things, and you would never guess that he was going to end up here. And
Right.
it's the same thing over and over again everywhere I go with my own life story, mine and others. So that's essentially I think the recipe.
Right. Right. No, that's awesome. I think you've broken it down quite well. So one of the things we obviously want to get to is an understanding of the solution that you guys kind of sell into. So the other areas we'll get into is like the vertical itself and selling into government, which is a hot button topic of itself. So first, walk us through what Knowledgehook actually does and facilitates, and how it helps your core user.
Sure. So we are, I like to call a vertically integrated solution. We serve three people through three products that are connected together. When you think of education, there are three buildings that come to mind in K to 12.
Mm-hmm.
There's the home, right? There's the classroom,
Right.
and there's another building that very few people have experience in, which is the district. All three of them are key to unlocking to be able to properly make an impact in education.
Right.
Now, historically, maybe during the DVD and CD-ROM period, where EdTech was something you installed into a desktop, these EdTech was probably isolated. You could either serve the classroom or serve the home, or provide some, I don't know, accounting or system administrative tools in the district. But that's changed with the internet. But the paradigm of understanding all the opportunities between the district, the home, and the school, and how to connect them and create value, that has completely been cracked wide open for new ways of thinking.
Right.
And one of the things that was absent in education was companies and folks moving through each of those buildings and trying to understand what is everyone trying to do for one problem area. In our case, it was math education, and gave us the opportunity to spend an unusually, unprecedented amount of time becoming domain experts, working with other experts, and becoming domain experts in each of these three buildings, and how they're so fragmented, disconnected, and where can technology play a role. That gave birth to Knowledgehook, which is a new category called instructional guidance systems. It's the first software that uses student data to guide both the student, the parent, and the teacher. But behind the scenes, the district is buying the software to actually support teachers in their professional development. So this is the big insight. You hear these terms, actionable data, and it's often just a bit of, in my opinion, fluff. If it's actionable, you wouldn't call it that. You would actually state the action that it's supposed to do, the value in itself, right? So actionable data means we're hoping you figure something out with this, right?
Basically.
Because if you can action on it, then there's all kinds of characteristics to what that action is, and all kinds of levels of skill required to act on that data. And how are you supporting all of those things, right? And so I think the next generation of SaaS companies that have data and is not quite sure what to do with all that data, I imagine will either get disrupted or disrupt itself in figuring that out fairly quickly and starting to implement services or value-added things to support those actions. So we, in our area, actionable data for math is actually helping the teacher become a better teacher. And you'll be surprised at the skills it takes for a teacher to train 30 students on any given topic. I'll give you an example. If I had to teach the area of a rectangle to a classroom of 30, maybe in the first 3 to 4 years of doing this, I'll just go ahead and teach it. But eventually I'll notice that, among the kids who are answering the questions incorrectly for area of these rectangles, I'll notice very specific types of error patterns. So not just about who's right and wrong, but among who's wrong, predictable wrong answers that are common. And they're symptomatic of a deeper issue, a conceptual understanding of area. Often kids confuse area for perimeter. And so that's a great opportunity for a teacher to understand, identify that, and adjust their instruction accordingly, right? And so there's many, for just area of a rectangle, there's many different types of predictable ways students, develop their understanding of the concept. And often teachers who are really trained and specialized in teaching a group of 30 can actually move the needle in terms of student achievement when they can identify those problems and are taught exactly in the moment of those issues arising how to address them. And currently there has been no software that has been entered into that market. It's a highly specialized, highly niche area. We're the first software to do so.
Yeah.
And as you know, the son of a math tutor, actually from a very relatively poor family in Sri Lanka, who taught himself math and then became a tutor at 13, to immigrate to Canada and struggled in math. That gave me the motivation to spend time in public education and try to look at the problem, particularly around math education. And I'm very proud to be able to say that we found and hit on something that at least gives me purpose and continues to give me purpose in how we not just serve Canada, but serve the world now. And that's our goal right now.
That's awesome. So at its core, your users have a more interactive way of learning, but you're facilitating better educators moving forward and kind of using those insights and drawing and helping teachers become better teachers.
Correct. And that only, to this day, that only serves the district building's needs. It
Mm-hmm.
serves the teachers in that it's done in a practical way for them to want to do. But really, it's the district building that most ed tech people are not a part of, right? If you are, it's kind of a bit of a paradox, right? If you have a career in the district, that means you spent maybe 5 to 10 years in the school, right? And then eventually, it's typically, even on average, it's probably 15 to 20 years before you find yourself in a district. And so when you think about technology being born out of a district, like the career trajectory, they're just not like it's not one that uh,
Right.
looking back, it's no surprise that it's not something where technology ideas are born.
Right.
So it really took some outsiders to come in and understand like what's going on in the classroom, what's going on in the district, and what's the disconnection, where's the role of tech. On the other side of the equation, in the home, Knowledgehook is basically moving closer and closer to creating. We look at our competition as Fortnite. We look at it as Roblox, Minecraft, and we think about how homework is under attack by an incredible plethora of social
Yeah.
media and video games, and we want to be able to go where the student is at. There's a lot of nuance in how you go about it that leads to better learning outcome and student engagement. And so it's not just blindly going into it, but really working through it, but also still setting the standard as are we taking market share or time share away from these video games into knowledge work? And if we're not good enough. And that's the bar we set over there. And so there's lots of things we've done to really move heavily in that direction. But at the same time, in a way that districts, when we like educate them on different types of game mechanics that are conducive for learning, others that are not, like it's another thing that they don't look or know much about. But we pay an incredible amount of time thinking through, working with the right experts. But at the same time, we measure our success and are we actually is this child sitting there thinking, video game, knowledge hook, and keep chipping away at it till we be able to take till we carve a more and more timeshare from that. And
Right.
that's sort of
Awesome.
how we approach the home.
So one of the questions I also had was, government is one of the hardest verticals to sell into. So, obviously Knowledgehook has been quite successful into building a presence within our educational system, obviously because you guys provide a tremendous value. But, walk us through a typical sales cycle with a government or educational board and what considerations you have to make, before closing a deal. So like what's the go-to-market strategy and like what are, you know, things you have to consider before you even approach a board.
The first thing I should state is, our success isn't purely on us just being good at go to market in government. Our success has been also a product of its time. So the last few adopters of any emerging category, technology in this case, is healthcare and education. And so we're going through what maybe the rest of other private sector industries have gone through in the 2000s, 2010s. Education and healthcare are always the last. There's a book called The Third Wave. One of our investors, Steve Case, founder of AOL, he published that book, I think, 4 years ago, and said how there's a third wave coming. The first wave was AOL and laying out, like the power grid, laying out the slow
Yeah.
infrastructure, the dial-up modems, all that stuff. The second wave was like, oh, I came up with this idea and just kind of went viral and TikTok, right? And all of a sudden, and that's the second wave. And the third wave is these slower moving, but equally, uh, you know, huge opportunities. But timing is everything.
Right.
And so even when I was looking at the dip 10 years ago, I was anticipating that around this period, this is when the results will show, not just because of my learning and understanding, but also where the market will be when I get there. And, analyzing trends and planning that long run. And, just to prove to you that I'm not just making that up. My wife was passionate about senior healthcare. She was volunteering at senior homes long before I met her. We were dating at the time. She was doing her master's at McGill as a neuroscientist for aging, Alzheimer's, and at the time, baby boomers had not yet retired. They're starting to retire now. She's currently the chief scientific officer at the Canadian Alzheimer's Society. And her career also, we thought...
Power couple there. Power couple.
Well, she's the better... Yeah, the power really is leaning in one direction. That's her side, but at home. But yeah, like she's definitely, someone I'm very proud, and I'm always bragging about her success. But like it's very similar thinking. And the reason I wanted to just share those two examples for anyone listening, like it's, if you have something you're passionate about, but it's not quite popular now, that's not the thing you look at. Because at the time she was telling me how, pediatricians and childcare was really the thing that was popular. No one's really paying attention to senior care. And I just remember, talking about this back then. And so it actually, that is a good sign of something that isn't quite popular yet. I know, if Mozart was alive today, I don't know that he would be, attending classical class or music and playing in orchestras. I think he might be playing with different mediums. He might not even be in music. He might express himself through movies or AR, VR. Like it is, often it's about passion. Sometimes people confuse for the actual medium. But I think it's actually about making an impact and finding some medium for which you can express and finding some connections, intrinsic connections to that medium. But passion doesn't have to be, I don't intrinsically enjoy math questions. I enjoy the idea that it can empower your identity to build confidence to solve problems, right? And I don't think a teacher who loves math is necessarily geeking out about the math questions, but the ability to empower someone with of their unlocking that ability to think critically and solve math questions. So anyway, coming back to the original question, EdTech was going to be a big one. So that's part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of the success, just as much as the other things that we're doing well inside the company. Because even though timing is also key, there are other things that also have to work. So the other thing I want to add, the second thing I want to add, there's three things. The second thing is around go-to-market to selling to government. I use this analogy of a marathon runner, again, but this time in the context of Kenyan marathon runners and how they they practice every morning at a high altitude. And so when they go to run, their ability to compete in a rich oxygen environment just sets them apart among everyone else. And one of the things that selling to government does for the go-to-market and the commercial is actually reveal all the flaws. When you succeed in that market, for me personally, it's revealed all the flaws I see in all these other go-to-market strategies that get away with a lot of what I call burning of leads and potential market share because of these imperfections in the way they sell to their client and burn leads and burn their brand. And in many ways, focus on the seller's journey versus the buyer's journey, which gets to my third and perhaps the most important part that will help you, give your listeners some insight into how we sell to government. When we closed our seed round, we got a ton of emails from marketing experts, digital advertising experts, and just a plethora. And if you know anything about entrepreneurship, you know that the first phase of entrepreneurship is product market fit.
Yeah.
This journey of trying to build something, test it out as your customer wanted, that sort of thing. And when you go through that phase, you act more like a scientist and you're constantly trying to challenge your own thinking. So you're passionate and emotional about the long-term view of that you can find something in this space, but you're being scientific, rational, objective about every idea you put into the world. and wait to see if the customer will use it, buy it, and are they truly benefiting from it, even though they're buying it and using it? Is this something that's going to last? Asking those critical questions, you become very scientific about it. So you're very open to criticism, right? And you're very, you develop this deep understanding of your domain and how to get there in terms of go to market, but you're very receptive to criticism. So then you run into these guys in sales and marketing who are extremely confident and tell us this is how you should do go to market. And naturally, for a guy like that who just came out of his period of go to market, it's like, oh man, these guys probably know what they're talking about. Because if I was that confident, I totally, I would listen too, right? So, and I am confident about these things, but that I'm just about to learn. So if you're that confident, you must be as good as I am on this piece. So show me what to do. And so we would open the gate to listen to all kinds of experts, agencies, brought on folks. And I learned very quickly that go-to-market experts, just like every other part of any business, every department for that matter, there are stages in a company where you need different sets of experts for each of those departments. And the vast majority of go-to-market experts likely got their experience in mature companies because the vast majority of opportunities occur in mature companies. And there's this rare type of go-to-market expert or set of experts that existed at this rare point in every company's history where they were a nobody, a no brand. Sure, they have 10, 40 customers in this little pocket over here, but all of the rest of the world or other markets that are not connected to that little network has no idea who they are. And these go-to-market experts are working closely with the founder to basically lay out a strategy that, quite frankly, is very different from what I was initially thought important for go-to-market. And so an example of what not to do is we got approached by ad agencies, and they essentially said, you should, data, and let me give you this dashboard, and you could do these split tests, and, that's we'll optimize these, conversions and get you these deals. And so, this sounds all interesting. So we tried maybe, not even a lot, like $1,000 of tests.
Okay.
It didn't take long for me to figure out, something's not right here. I went to one conference and watched the customers, come out of their conferences, meet each other, and then they come to the commercial booths, and there's this weird relationship of why do I feel this inferior level of inferiority in this situation? This is not how the exchange should be. There's something unnatural about that. And so all of these unnatural connections didn't feel right to me. And this is where I asked the right question. Okay, ads. Okay, ads. So who has the highest ad revenue? Who are we paying ads to today, right? Who's making the most money in terms of ad? Google and Facebook. All right. So what did Google and Facebook do to become Google and Facebook? Who did they buy ads from? Billboards? Where did they spend their advertising? Because clearly they believe in ads because they're selling it every day. Yeah. So what exactly got them to where they are? What do they do in their growth teams? Can I find someone who was in a growth team at Google, who was in a growth team at Facebook? And I did. I found someone, head of growth at Tesla, formerly on the growth team at Facebook. And it's, the hard part is asking the question genuinely, and then finding people who can get you the answer. That's a bit of a scavenger hunt. And so that's where all the energy is spent, searching for these folks, right? Designing the question and who has this damn answer. And so I went out looking, and I found this speaker. I was actually a speaker at the same event. And then I found out he was going to be there following. And I spoke to the organizers and said, I'd love to meet him. Can someone introduce me? So waited and spoke to him and got on the call with him. And he walked me through how Facebook does growth. And no ads, nothing to do with ads, nothing resembling or leveraging ad infrastructure, right? And that was the first key uh, to me that, you know what, there's something missing here, and there was
Yeah.
something deeper happening. So then I started to go find people. I found I got introduced to the CMO of Canada Goose, who was before that the head of brand at UFC. And when Dana Dana hired her to help with the UFC, and at the time UFC was essentially like an underground brand, and they weren't the only one. There were a handful of them. Right? I learned a lot of the stories of John Chambers through the Cisco president, another the head of global operations, who took Cisco's professional services from 8 to 80 billion. And I remember the stories of how John Chambers and how their team did their go-to-market during those growth periods, how Cisco Canada adopted those strategies for the Canadian market very early on. And I just started collecting stories in IBM, various places online, searching for these unique folks that are right at the beginning of a brand not being heard of in a market and then breaking into it. So that was really important, because that process, if you understand that, you could use that for any problem, I think. And designing the right question and finding the people to get you the answer. The answer is actually really easy if you put effort on all the other stuff. So what was the answer? So what came out, right? All the suspense for the pattern, right?
Yeah, I've been waiting for this too. That's so interesting.
So believe me, it's worth your while. So what I learned very quickly is what they're doing in a nutshell is looking at the buyer's journey from someone who's never heard of you, or even your category, whether you're a new category, existing category, never even heard of your category. So going as far as, I've never used a screwdriver, and you sell a power drill, which is more advanced than a screwdriver. So going as far as I've never used a screwdriver. So think of someone who's never even heard of your category or earlier parts of your category leading up to yours, and all the way to learning, becoming aware, interested in your brand, in your category, and making the decision. So looking at the buyer's journey, and what these companies did in a nutshell was created a chain of startups that strung along the buyer's journey. And I call them startups. So a chain of startups that strung along the buyer's journey that competed in and of itself like a business to generate value, to move the buyer from A to B, B to C, C to D. And across each of those steps in the buyer's journey, build out another startup, right? And essentially compete on how can I create value, for this part of the buyer's journey, using the mediums that people would consume to make a decision, either from becoming aware of a brand, evaluating a brand, making a decision. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, what they were doing across the buyer's journey. That's I've never seen anyone write about it this way, think about it this way. And I'm giving you the Kenyan marathon high altitude version of this, because what I just gave you was the extreme example. And the truth is, even UFC and others, all of them in some ways did parts of that really well, not all of it, and not necessarily think as aggressively as I just described. And because when I talk about those startups, I'm thinking a business in and of itself that would make money, in and of itself that can drive its own ROI, in and of itself that has to differentiate like a business, and then subsidize that business. And the way you measure and quantify its success is essentially when you think of traditional go-to-markets, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, that's your revenue, right? Moving them along that buyer's journey. The problem I find is a lot of folks understand the idea of following a buyer's journey versus the seller's journey. But the truth is, it is actually really hard. I've had this problem internally as I move people through this process to think like the buyer and to move through that journey and make those investments the way a founder would make those investments for product market fit. And that is essentially what we've done at Knowledgehook to drive market share into all these markets. We have the leading thought leadership brands, and we're inspired by companies like Red Bull, who has their own media house. So I'm not a fan of the drink. Personally, I like the drink, but I'm not promoting unhealthy drinking. But the idea of creating a value-added media brand like Red Bull, in and of itself is rivaling. It's like the ESPN of long tail sports, right? Understanding that market position being the ESPN of long tail sports, because ESPN already exists. To differentiate, understanding that extreme sports, that is the one place in everyone's human journey, right? Where, living on the edge, if you experience something that might not be healthy, if you drink it every day, but experience it just for that moment, it's not against human values, because you're trying to create a unique experience. Because truthfully, if you drink it once a year, that's not going to do any harm. For a special occasion, not going to do any harm. If you drink it on occasion for these living on the edge moments, there's nothing against human value, societal value, to do that. If you make it a habit where you drink it every night, that might be a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And
so basically tying in the brand perception to the actual product in terms of what they're doing. So I love the analogy that you just proposed. So, I mean, it's really, really cool. I mean, I also love the fact how you kind of re-engineered basically how we look at go-to-market. It's not, like any traditional person that I talk to in sales or whoever it may be in marketing, they ultimately always think about, let's get a large funnel at the top and then let's just, kind of narrow it down that way. And then, instead of actually understanding what the buyer has to go through in terms of stages. So I really love how you kind of open that kind of knowledge and thought process up, because working in the startup space for 5 years, it's the consistent traditional thinking. But we don't think about, the thing that really got my brain going was Google and Facebook are into ads, but at one point, that the fact that you said, who do they buy ads from or whatever, that was really thought provoking. It's holy shit, that makes a lot of sense.
Isn't it? It's such an unnatural thing, advertising. And if your entire business is built upon this thing that doesn't look like the future of how people are going to make decisions, right? It's a sitting duck, in my opinion. And that's the other thing. Your product better be something that is thinking into the future, not what people necessarily ask of today, but what they don't know they want.
Yeah.
And that's one, building on that type of foundation, is also important. So yeah. And that speaks to a lot of second wave companies, in my opinion, like Google and Facebook, but where they had these overnight successes, and they're like, what do I do with this? How do I make sense of this? And they don't have time to sit there and ponder on, is this the future of something? Because it's happening so fast that they themselves, anyone going through that, the founders are not growing at the pace at which the company is growing. The company is growing faster than the pace of any founder can possibly grow during that second wave companies. So you get a lot of companies with these young, great, and youth is a good thing, because you're not affected by the past, but at the same time, they themselves are overwhelmed at where this thing is going, and they're just riding this bull and trying to keep their head above water. And they can't, no one can really predict where it's going to land. But just looking under the hood, do you think, are we all buying targeted ads to, how often do we do that?
Right.
And not to say that it's a completely illegitimate business, and it's not to say that you can use that ad infrastructure appropriately to grow a business. I'll give you an example. This is an odd example. So Poopery. Have you heard of this commercial that it was a parody of a product that you use, after you do number one in the toilet and you spray for odor, right? It's called Poopery. Okay. And it went viral. It had 20 million, or maybe, I don't know how, maybe 100 million views as far as I know. And it had incredible sales on Amazon. And it was because it was a short, mini comical thing. Or what about a Dollar Shave Club, when that CEO was doing that one long shoot, and it was entertaining and it was funny, right? And 80% of his energy, right, was probably on creative and production value.
Right.
20% was probably to kick off and boost an ad, maybe less. And the whole thing went viral. So using ad infrastructure in that way makes sense, but I don't think Google or Facebook is going to want to tell you that, right? Because there's a lot of people desperately like just they have KPIs and are incented to not make risks or take risks, and so the more data and the more predictable you can make things, and the less, and because of KPIs, the luxury of time to learn is not available to them, right? Ad platforms where I can shout at a customer, on a Google search or on my Facebook feed or any feed for that matter, is just like a cottage industry of desperate attempts to try to grow their brands. And it's actually causing good brands to be mixed with bad brands. Like you would walk into, let's say, a flea market and not expect maybe Nike to sell there or Apple to sell there. And what it does is it actually dilutes your ability. You just tune it all out, because you can't make a very quick decision on these ads, because there's no way to, the other thing about go to market is, when I talked about these startups, trust is another thing that you have to think about. So let me give you an analogy. So you guys might come to me for advice on math software, if you ever have to, right? I have a friend who's a teacher, mom, any recommendations? Sure, I can give you advice. But if I told you, listen, I built this car, in my garage, no name brand, and I know you have set aside $25,000 to buy a car. I'll give you this for $10K. Heck, I'll give it to you for $5K. You're not going to cough up that $5K for that thing in my garage, no matter how good it looks, let alone drive it on a highway, or even get in that car for someone else to drive on the highway. It is a no-name brand, a manufactured unit of one. So this idea that all I have to do is know that you're looking for a car and have a relationship with you to make the recommendation to sell you the car, and just have to compete on all the other benchmarks. Maybe it is the best car out there. You have no way of knowing. And even though you trust me for certain things and we have that relationship, you're not going to trust me for that car.
Right.
So this idea that it's just about being at the right time, right place, and making a compelling case, and that I might even have a prior relationship with you. In most cases, they don't even think about that. They're hoping if I just show up cold, but I'm here at the right time when you're looking for something, that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know how much money is being wasted on cold outreach and leads to hit a quarterly target, and leads are being burnt instead of depositing into people's cup so that you can create market share growth. It's inefficient for the people listening to consuming those emails, and it's inefficient and it's demoralizing for the people who have to do it.
For sure.
In my opinion. Again, sorry. This is where I wanted to take the conversation. Hopefully it's of value, but yeah.
No, that's great. And you're using great examples here, which is why I was wondering if I can take a step back to go back to the screwdriver example. Can you use that example again to kind of show
Absolutely.
how you would do that from someone who doesn't know what a screwdriver is to buying a power drill?
100. That's a great example. So I remember walking into those small hardware stores, and you just have to know what you were looking for, go buy it, and go to the front and buy it like you would do at a 7-Eleven, right? Okay, and with Home Depot, you walk in and you don't even need, you have this feeling of not having to know, right? This feeling of like someone's going to teach me and actually take the time to explain to me. And I remember when Home Depot popped up in Scarborough, like my cousin went, she said, you should try too. And it's all about having a passion. I was pretty young, right? And as you know, I was doing odd eclectic jobs between schools. So I applied I didn't get it, but my cousin got it. She was a gardener and she loved gardening. And they were looking for people who are passionate, enthusiast hobbyists who are willing to get excited to train people and talk to people. And so part of moving from, never knowing where the value of a screwdriver is to a screwdriver to a thing is education, right? And part of the education starts with understanding the landscape of pain points in a journey. Like I just use a doctor analogy. Doctor, you go in, you tell them your symptoms, and you might think the solution is Tylenol, but the symptoms might not like might be evidence of something deeper than that, a root problem,
Mm-hmm.
an underlying issue, right? And the landscape of pain points has this characteristic of what you feel, your symptoms, what you think the problem is, and maybe the problem is actually deeper than that. And how well do you know that, right? So the journey of like, so it's like it's a journey, and that journey is often not something that people naturally take. It's a journey that happens in one of two ways. It either happens with society as a group. Like when the iPhone 1 first came out in 2010, not everyone jumped in, but there was a first wave of early adopters. They started talking. They spent enough time paying attention to those demos. A few people took the dive and bought the product, tried them, like, oh my God, we're dealing with the issues, eventually educated, and eventually the laggards just noticed that everyone was moving in this direction and was slowly being educated or being told this is where everything's going, and just jumped on. So sometimes people move through the journey of no screwdriver to power drill just because of the timing of where society is in the
Mm-hmm.
adoption of a certain category of tools. And sometimes that gets accelerated, right, through education, like walking into Home Depot and talking to enthusiasts or watching YouTube videos, and all of a sudden going down this rabbit hole and actually becoming quickly moving through that journey.
Right.
And it's education of what you didn't know you could do, right, with a screwdriver, and then education of what you didn't know you could do as you advance those projects from small ones to larger ones with a power drill, and understanding where people are in their journey of pain, and showing them that this, and grabbing them at the symptom rate where they're like, I have this pain point, but I have no idea it has to do with not getting a power drill, right? And creating your first startup right there, then the next startup to moving them from there to here,
Right.
which is like, okay, screwdriver to power drill. And there's other types of characteristics I think about through that journey, but it is really education is the big one. So you'll know that we actually have two leading brands. They're really, really early. The polish and stuff, by January, you'll see incredible look and feel polish and all that stuff. But we made these investments, thought leadership brands for district leaders and math leaders. And there's workshops that we've launched with leading experts along the buyer's journey. And it's just moving people right through that process. And we're building trust, right? Like if I was your most trusted person in cars, right? That is one key element into making the decision, right? And there's other, like I'm giving you I wish I could walk you through every aspect of this, but I'm giving you, parts of it. There's a lot of pieces, but these are definitely important parts.
And you mentioned one really cool point there, or one really important point there is kind of just the timing of it all, and just making sure that you're kind of catching that wave at that right time. So for you with EdTech and Knowledgehook, was the pandemic something that kind of accelerated that? Would you say that was kind of like the timing that you were prepared and just kind of right place, right time?
Maybe the right answer for a guy in my position is to say yes. But I've always been one, and maybe I'm part stubbornness, part, I don't know, just maybe hopefully wisdom, is to never make decisions on short-term trends.
Right.
And so a lot of the things we're doing, we were already doing or had plans to do, and just continue to just do on schedule. There were a few exceptions to that. For example, one thing that was a blessing in disguise was, as I mentioned to you, I wasn't a fan of conferences. And I had one experience at a conference, and it just unnatural feeling. And I just wouldn't want that for any of my teammates or myself in that way. And for the customer to know us in that way.
Yeah.
Because I actually think we're hurting our brand when they look at us handing a pamphlet and they don't want to meet us in some ways. And so there was something unnatural. So the pandemic shut down all conferences. And so this was an initiative that I was still supporting, but I was trying to find more deeper ways to provide value during a conference. And we were trying to invest in that while also trying to invest in our online media arms. And the pandemic helped me make that decision of being able to, cut one completely off and just focus on the other. And because I know folks were passionate about the conference, and I was really passionate about the media arm, and I was like, okay, if we're going to do this conference, we're going to make it really valuable. But the ideas we were exploring at the time, were good in terms of value, but nowhere near as good as what the media arm is doing. And the same people were responsible for both. And the pandemic just said, oh, okay, well, now we can only focus on the media arm. And so that was a blessing in disguise. The other thing maybe the pandemic did was there were certain things that were on the shelf that were like going to happen a little later. We accelerated a few months in advance, or we put one thing out and brought another thing in. There's a few swaps like that of what we prioritized, but it didn't. There were a lot of things that we just continued to say no to, despite our situation. And it's because I keep thinking about where is the future going, and I really want to make sure we build for that. And so that's just the way I'm wired. It's worked for me since. And I just, while there may be strategies for certain types of leaders where you ride the wave, the smaller waves, and there's certain businesses and business models that work really well there. Mine, in me, particularly, my success comes from looking at 5 to 10 year trends and really staying the course and building out the longer, bigger brands and stuff like that. So that's the strategy I know, and that's the one I continue to do. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the company at all. I just feel like the pandemic kind of forced everyone virtual. So it's kind of added the acceleration, right?
It did accelerate. It did accelerate externally, like it did help accelerate, but we didn't change our plans internally for the pandemic.
Right.
We were already doing a lot of things that I think, like a lot of technology companies, technology played a huge role in getting people through and continuing to get people through this period.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that value became what the adoption of that definitely accelerated. So you're absolutely right in that sense. I forgot to mention that or answer that part of your question. But internally, we didn't change much of what we did.
For sure. I think throughout this whole conversation, everything that you've mentioned, a lot about yourself seems like you're always forward thinking and looking at what to expect around the corner rather than what's at the end of the road, right? And so what do you kind of see with the future of your company, especially in the realm of education? Because one of the topics that we get asked a lot about on the podcast is kind of schooling, right? I think school is under attack. You mentioned homework is under attack, but I think school is under attack right now from entrepreneurs who tell you college degrees don't matter, how everything's going virtual and we're still forced to pay tuition, which doesn't make sense. So like there's a lot of movement in that. So what do you kind of see for the future of your company and kind of the future of education in this landscape?
That's a good question. And I would break this into two parts, like higher ed and lower ed. And higher ed, so university, that product hasn't changed for quite some time, but the price point keeps continuing to go up and up and up. And during the pandemic, you saw a completely night and day in terms of reaction between the value of higher ed and the value of K to 12. Right. And in higher ed, and this is funny because we would talk about this all the time internally, because like, how do you take a bet on something that seems like it's going to get disrupted, which is university? And it just doesn't seem like this thing is going to last. And COVID, I think, is the beginning of what will be a huge transformation that's underway. It's the accelerant of that transformation where you're going to see that business model disrupt and people hopping from high school maybe to intermediate programs, I suspect, and then straight into the workforce. I suspect that's where it's going. Right. And I think that's going to happen almost out of necessity, like it did maybe early 1900, 1850s, where a lot of people didn't even go to university. And I suspect that might actually happen, at some variation of that might occur again with the income gap, inequality, and all the other pressure points, and the cost of education and the need to make a living versus accumulating debt even further, right? And so I think there's going to be some interesting conditions that are going to redefine higher education. So that's going to happen. And I think Harvard and a few brands will stick around the way we have ponies. Even though, Ford Model T disrupted thing, we still have some use cases for ponies and dot matrix printers. I don't know if you noticed at the airports, they still use them. And I'm not saying that Harvard will not be useful. I think it'll be these weird crown jewel brands that will be used in other ways, and research will continue in other ways. But so that's kind of a weird place. And that's why I personally, having gone from MCAT pivoting then to doing courses at university, prep courses, and then to K-12, my exposure to that place seems like it's a wild, wild west. And I do want to go through the journey of K-12 and build that brand. And as that stuff sorts out, figure out where we want to take our journey into that. And, with kids knowing who we are, hopefully leveraging that as we try to expand into that world down the line. There's opportunity. We're not looking at it right now. And I want to wait till the chips kind of start to settle.
Right.
The lower ed during the pandemic, everyone heard about the pain of parents having to juggle babysitting with their children and doing work. And I've always said this internally, like at minimum, where are you going to send your kids? So public education is also public babysitting, right? It's a combination of two things. It's a service for parents to go to work, right? And so it's not going anywhere, guys. Some variation of this will exist in K-12. And let's say classrooms, I'm just going to, on one case, you might have everyone continue to send their kids to K-12, public schools or private schools, or small pockets and pods of K-12 communities might exist, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's still going to have some of the same characteristics. Where public K-12 should be changing, I suspect, is the choices of the rate at which they adapt their curriculum to the future and stay competitive in that way. There's certain courses I'm still surprised they teach today, and we should be spending more time in, as you know, financial literacy, which we recently started to incorporate into the Ontario curriculum, and many others are doing that. There are certain places like coding as well. So our mission is to inspire the problem solvers of tomorrow. Math was one place where we saw the most predictable and stable, universal area to drive deep vertical value that wasn't going to change. And so that was our anchor. And I use the analogy of Starbucks. When you walk into Starbucks, you're coming in for great coffee, and then you might buy a meal or other things along the way. So we will be expanding, but it's hard to tell whether we're going to expand across the subjects that are in the current boxes of class today, or the subjects that are inspiring the problem solvers of tomorrow, and where those products will be. So we'll be expanding subjects eventually, but we want to be this brand like Apple or Tesla that focus on one thing really well, vertically integrated, create a powerful experience, and then have that reputation, and then venture into other subjects. Mm-hmm. The other thing is we're competing on three fronts. We're competing on the future of classroom lessons, right? The future of homework, and the future of tutoring. So I look at the Kumons as our competitor very much. I look at, but I look at we're competing with them by not directly competing with them. We're competing with them by competing with Fortnite, and we're competing with them by you know what I mean? So not directly, like there was a really great South Asian movie that came out. I think Surya, Tamil Nadu actor, acted in it about Decca Airlines. Have you guys heard of this movie?
No.
I'm sure my sister knows it if I ask her.
About it.
I'm a little behind on Tamil movies. But go ahead.
That's the first Tamil movie. Admittedly, I used to love watching it. It was the first one I watched in a long time. Someone showed it to me. I was like, whoa, it's about an entrepreneur. It's a bit of a side segue. I'll segue back. But the story was about airlines that brought the middle class and lower middle class into the air. But he was the Henry Ford of airlines for India. Right. And it was about coming from a small, poor village and competing to do that. And he was inspired by, if you're familiar with the book Blue Ocean Strategy, in the book, they talk about I think it's Southwest Airlines, the low-cost airlines. And in the book, in America, that company was you can argue competing with the other airlines, but really they said they were competing with Greyhound, or the equivalent of Greyhound, the inner city buses, the coaches. And this guy in that movie for India, Decca Airlines, he wasn't competing with, although the big airlines apparently was pissed off that he was trying to enter into the airlines and was very much threatened by it. He was competing with trains. And really great movie, really speaks to this idea. And for me, when I say I'm competing with Kumon, I'm not competing with Kumon, I'm competing with Fortnite, right? And I mean it that way. And when I'm talking about teachers, and I'm competing there, I'm competing with some books, I'm competing with workshops, but not necessarily competing with them, but trying to solve the same problem they're trying to solve in a way that we haven't thought of solving it. But so there's different areas, and I think, and finally the last one, I think for us, AI, along with other sciences called psychometric testing, psychometric analysis, is going to allow us to eventually disrupt standardized testing to the point where a kid could be what appears to be playing a video game, and we're getting standardized test results. And I think that's going to be the underlying my autonomous driving equivalent for me. Like that's the thing that we're doing quietly behind the scenes as well, is how do we get rid of that thing altogether and get the effective, instrument, get our instruments as sensitive and as validated, as effective as standardized tests, and be able to show the standardized testing agencies and the decision makers that we can predictably measure what you're looking for without actually being invasive and intrusive into the classroom for students and teachers, so they can focus on the thing that matters most. So those are things that we'll be doing on the background. And that's kind of how I sort of see the whole plan. And as you know, now you know our go-to-market strategy.
Yeah.
So you know how I think about that as well. And I try to create leading brands for professional learning that compete like their businesses in of itself, and then subsidize it and use that to drive our brand leadership.
The breakdown is incredible.
Yeah, I think.
I apologize.
No. I think this is wonderful. I think you're one of the first guests that have really taken what a go-to-market strategy is, and kind of broken it down in terms of your kind of perspective on it, given analogies, and then also applied it into the logic of the trends that you're kind of seeing within the market. So with how you mentioned you're kind of competing with Fortnite, you're almost kind of looking at the trend of gamification and combining with education and almost making it a standardized product where that is your representative tool to gauge where a student is and stuff like that. So that's super cool. I find that really cool. It's like kids enjoy games, right? Like my brother, he's 8 years younger than me, and all today he tried to buy the new Xbox. And that's all he's been talking about today. He's like, oh, two of my friends got it. I didn't get it. Now what am I going to do? And all that stuff. So it's fun in terms of how you apply that. I also love the fact that you mentioned, education, university hasn't really changed. To be honest, I didn't learn much in university. And I felt like I learned way more through like real life application of doing things and executing on things. Like I failed at 2 startups, one actually commercialized. I learned so much more than I did in 4 years of university. Right? Taught how to talk to people, how to reach out to the correct stakeholders, how to like fundamentally think about these things, because those are not things that I learned in university, and I don't think we'll ever learn in university. And even taking these intermediate courses like on Udemy or Coursera, they're very kind of digestive, and they really focus in on a niche core skill that you can kind of pick up. So I think that's where I feel like I've learned the most.
Yes.
And I feel like that $40,000 that I spent, or my parents helped me, get through it, not as worthy as it, they expected.
Part of our immigrant culture of,
of course,
trying to, hedge as much. Yeah. It's, I hear you. I kind of shared similar experiences growing up with school, and it definitely speaks to the inefficiencies in education. Mm-hmm. Just like advertising, we talked about ad infrastructure and all the things that could be improved there, right? And I think that's actually created for us like just a really rich place to spend time and constantly look Like there's nothing we're going to do where we're all going to say we figured it out, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
There's always going to be some design flaw that we could optimize, make it better, or rethink through bottom up. And I think that culture is, as long as, I'm here and we're working on this space, and there's a lot of folks in our company that just truly care about that. And as long as that culture stays at Knowledgehook, that's going to be what allows us to constantly innovate. All of this in the context of competitive strategy. So one of the things you have to think about is competitive strategy. And it's kind of odd for me to come on a podcast and just reveal this entire thing. You would think that would in turn result in, competitors or someone listening, or I would at least be a little more considerate of that. Here's the thing about competitive strategy. The great thing about competitive strategy is about finding the weakness in everyone else's strength and using that to make that your strength, which also means you'll have your own weaknesses, but that allows you to carve out your own market.
Right.
That's the heart of competitive strategy: finding the weakness in your competitor's strength, and and doing that consistently to, and you're not doing, like, I'm not building this thinking about my competitors. I'm building this thinking about solving a problem. But at the same time, it's really important to think about, am I doing something that like some other company just adds a few dollars in resources to just solve, or am I solving something so strongly different in terms of paradigm business model that the competitors could not just easily replicate? Because that's equally important as you're doing this to create a thriving thing. And one of the things I realized is we organize ourselves in school through subjects and these very specialized boxes, right? And we go into work and there's these very specialized departments and these specializations, and you probably learn them on through your startup efforts, that the world isn't really organized that way.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things have connections and they're connected and there's context, right? So one of the things we do in the core product itself to stay competitively strong, so that it's not something that not only are we finding value for our customer, but it's something that isn't easily replicable.
Replicated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Is looking at every company and their core competencies and putting it into a box and trying to find value for the customer, where if they try to find another alternative, there's no one company that has all those core competencies under their roof.
Right.
So they're in like different boxes. So I use this analogy of cooking. So imagine, let's use Scarborough. Imagine 3 restaurants in Scarborough. Okay. Let's say a Sri Lankan restaurant, an Indian restaurant, and a Chinese restaurant. And imagine this cook who walks into the Sri Lankan restaurant and learns to, cook kotroti and all these other traditional cuisine meals, and spends 2 years, but not becoming a master chef, but just enough to learn the cuisines and the ingredients and stuff. Then leaves that restaurant and goes to across the street and goes to the Indian restaurant and spends 2 years and learns Indian cuisine. And then goes to the Chinese restaurant and spends 2 years and learns the Chinese cuisine. And then opens up a shop in the middle of all these 3 restaurants, a fusion restaurant that mixes these things together, right? And maybe brings in a few of those experts and then pisses them off because they're like, in the first attempt of the menu, you're bastardizing their cuisines, right?
Right.
But still going ahead and trying to experiment and fuse something together and creating an entirely new fusion menu. And then people start coming there. Now look at those 3 restaurants paying attention to the success of that fusion restaurant. How can they compete? They're going to have to learn the other cuisines. Right. And the probability maybe of learning a few things, let's say 25% success probability, compounds with all the other probabilities. So I got to learn this and this and this and this. And each of those probabilities compounded make for a really hard thing to replicate.
Right.
And so that is ironically both the process to innovate, to identify a new paradigm, a new way of doing things, is to actually get out of these boxes that life has kind of trained us to think in, and to see how these domains work deep under the hood, first principles, really thinking through things. It's like, how is all this connected? And then seeing connections that others haven't, and then using that to experiment, to test, to create new things for customers, new value-added things. And and looking back and noticing like who in the industry can do this. Oh no, you have to get people from that company, and that company in education to come together. And I know they're not going to do it because that process
Yeah.
actually doesn't scale. So we have this concept called the garage in the company for innovation. And it's for someone who has an idea that is fusing multiple things that do not currently exist in the world. Maybe they're not inventing some new technology, but they're innovating. So they're taking existing ideas, putting it together to create something new, right? To go to market with. And they're fusing these ideas. And so I do most of the garages, but a lot of folks are starting to have been also setting up garages in their own. And we do this, but we call it a garage. And the reason why we call it a garage is inside the garage, there's one chief innovator who has an idea. And the role of the garage is to have all of these folks actually essentially kind of support that chief innovator in running the idea. So they'll do small things without necessarily challenging the idea, because the idea needs to be challenged by the world as opposed to committee. And so people they trust come into that group, some of the best engineers, best marketers, whatever, they come together, they go into the garage and they come out with something, and they're isolated, they're protected. And then when they come out with a few validations, like we actually came up with something and it looks like the customer likes it and it's working and it was never done before. And here are the things we fused together to do this. And then you start bringing in more people and to get around and grow it. And this process doesn't scale. And traditional companies that are so big and mature often are run by CEOs and executive teams that are specialized in their boxes and do not have the same culture that you need for garage culture. It's actually the opposite. And so companies who can innovate that way and go across multiple domains and grow a company, I think that's how you get competitive advantage and grow in your markets. And that's a process that makes me, realize that I can talk about this stuff all the time, and that's not going to necessarily change the way our current landscape in our space is going to arrange itself.
I think that analogy and that story kind of sums up your whole process with this itself. Like it took me some time as you kind of walked us through that process to kind of understand how you were tying this together. And it's incredible that even Amin and myself, we've complained about schooling, we've complained about education and how, we barely learned anything and we paid $45K for something, right? But your perspective on this is just, why don't we take the education to where their eyes are? And that's kind of essentially what advertising does. And you just kind of took that model and made it something useful rather than something exploitative. So I think your story around that is just, it goes full circle, and it's really cool how you're able to tie that two together and kind of bring that education aspect to people where they want to be taught or where they can be taught. So when you said, "Hey, we're competing with Fortnite," I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but now I get it, right? Like if they're able to immerse themselves in a video game type atmosphere, and you're able to pick up learnings from what they're good and bad at, they're learning and having fun at the same time, which we will never complain about. We always like to end our podcast with like a lightning round where we just throw some quick questions at you just to understand a little bit more about yourself. We're just going to throw you a couple questions, and it'll be whatever the first thing that comes to mind. You may have already answered this already on the podcast, but can you tell us your kind of most impactful or most favorite book or movie of all time? It might be The Dip, but
the book that I recommend that's the most useful for most people is no matter what your journey is, Made to Stick.
Made to Stick.
Made to Stick.
Yeah.
Okay.
I read a lot of books. Definitely that's the one that I think is the most useful for most.
So you're dealing with Knowledgehook or any other career that you've had your hand in. You come home after a long day. How do you like to unwind? What's your strategy to kind of relax?
I mean, I'm very blessed with a son. My son Nico, 2 years old, and so I just look forward to going down and playing with him and my wife, and really just catching up and talking about our day and just playing with him. Really. So lately we've been just holding him, and he has a rocket that he built, and we have these balloons, and he's hitting them and pretending that he's one of Elon Musk's astronauts. So
sweet.
Yeah.
He has a rocket that he built,
like a little toy rocket that his mom,
okay,
wife had helped him make, and he's just like flying and hitting planets, blue planet and yellow planet, these balloons, I'm just, so that's our evening ritual these days.
Who knows? He could be like a leader on SpaceX one day,
Traveling
you
to
know?
Mars. That's
Yeah.
whatever he wants to do, I'm gonna get behind. But yeah, it's just kind of thinking of where we're getting going as a society. It's kind of exciting too. So
Yeah,
For
that's
sure.
awesome. That's awesome. So, question 3 here. If you were to give one piece of advice to any entrepreneur, what would that be?
you got this is the uh, one piece of advice I give to everyone, is try to, as quick as you can, especially if you're young, the younger you are, try to always go towards what gets you excited and passionate. And passion doesn't mean, uh, what you enjoy in the moment, but what you think you'll enjoy and have the least regret, 5 to 10 years or when you're older.
Hmm.
And I think try to always try to stay that course, because it'll never, it's the thing that results in the least regret. So
Right, right. And so we have one controversial question that we always ask our guests. And so I know you made some analogies with food. With pizza specifically, will you go ahead and order pineapples on it or no?
I have ordered pineapple. That's
But
your
do you enjoy
controversial.
it? That's the yeah.
Okay, so not the magic trick. Good, because I haven't done a magic trick in a while.
Oh, we that was question 5, but
Oh,
you know
dude.
we can get
Yeah,
we
I
can
wanted to save that.
I'm looking for a coin, man. I haven't done a magic trick in a while. So sorry, pizza, pineapple for sure. Yes.
Okay.
Awesome. We love it. Or I love it. Amin doesn't, but awesome. So yeah, we wanted to know if you'd be willing to show us anything that.
He has no props available to him.
You know what? There used to be a time where toonies and loonies used to like be everywhere, but not in current. That currency is just not as ubiquitous as it used to. I would definitely show you a coin trick on the screen, but I'm sorry, guys. I actually don't have
I mean,
No worries.
yeah.
illusions too. But
Yeah. Maybe
So you
another day we'll get a
yeah,
virtual magician show going on.
yeah.
See
It's been a
see
long
behind the
time
scenes.
since someone asked me to do a magic trick, but so,
Yeah, no, I it just came up along our research, and I was like, man, I don't wonder if he still does it. So that'd be pretty
I
cool. But
do, I
hey,
do. Maybe when my kid gets older, I'll start getting back into it.
for
Sweet.
sure. Hey, maybe you can build some component into Knowledgehook kind of around that, right? I think that'd be cool. I used to look up magic tricks all the
Magic,
time.
yeah.
But hey, this is great. We enjoyed this conversation so much. And your company itself is doing a lot of great things. And I feel like we're at a very transformative period in our time in terms of
Yeah.
education. So I feel like your company is kind of positioned to push the bar forward. And we're looking forward to seeing where you guys are going to go.
Thank you so much, and I'm really glad you guys are doing podcasts like this. Continue to do great work, and I'll be sure to watch your future podcasts as well.